This story is a work of fiction inspired by historical and supernatural themes. It is intended for entertainment purposes only and does not depict real individuals, locations, or religious institutions. Viewer discretion is advised. The content may include dark, psychological, and horror elements unsuitable for younger audiences. All characters and events are purely imaginary, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real events is entirely coincidental. The train screeched into the last station before the forest swallowed the tracks. Clara Evans stepped off, her leather boots pressing into the damp, mossy platform of Hollowvale. The cold October air clung to her skin like a ghost's breath. The town was small, just a cluster of wooden houses and a church whose bell tower leaned ever so slightly to the left, as if exhausted by time. Her suitcase felt heavier than it should, not from what it carried, but from where she was headed. St. Mary's Convent, abandoned for more than a century. She had come to document forgotten religious institutions for her PhD in historical anthropology. Her professor had warned her. Some places are left forgotten for a reason, Miss Evans. But Clara's curiosity had always been stronger than her fear. The convent, according to legend, had been sealed in 1873 after all 21 nuns vanished overnight. The church never issued a statement. The building was left to rot, its doors chained shut, its bell forever silent. But rumors said the silence didn't last long. An old man named Father Rook met her at the station. He was the only surviving priest from Hollowvale Parish and seemed deeply uneasy about her visit. "You're going up there alone?" he asked, eyes glinting beneath the shadow of his hat. "I'll be fine, Father. I'm just here for research." He shook his head slowly. "Research won't save your soul, my dear." The sisters of St. Mary's sought light and found something darker than sin itself. Whatever they awakened, it never left. The drive to the convent was long and winding. The path, once paved by the church, was now consumed by overgrown ivy and fog that rolled across the forest like restless spirits. As the car climbed the hill, Clara glimpsed the ruins of the convent, its spires jutting like blackened fingers through the mist. A shiver ran through her spine, yet her fascination only deepened. The caretaker, Mrs. Donnelly, met her at the gate. She was a quiet, gray-haired woman who rarely blinked and spoke only when necessary. "Don't stay after sundown," she warned softly. "The place remembers." Clara smiled politely, assuming it was just local superstition. She signed the research permit, took her lantern, and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, a cold draft whispered through the hall, carrying with it the faint smell of incense and decay. The main corridor stretched endlessly ahead, lined with portraits of nuns whose painted eyes seemed to follow her. Each portrait bore a name beneath it, but the last few were scratched out violently, as if erased from memory. Her first stop was the chapel. Sunlight pierced through shattered stained-glass windows, scattering crimson and gold across the dust-laden pews. The altar stood untouched, its marble surface cracked but still imposing. Above it hung a massive wooden crucifix. Christ's eyes seemed almost alive, glistening in the dim light. Clara set down her camera and began taking photographs. But when she looked at the first image on her screen, her breath caught. In the photo, a faint silhouette of a nun stood near the altar, head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. She looked around. The room was empty. "Probably just light distortion," she whispered to herself. Yet the chill that crept up her arms told her otherwise. Hours passed as she moved through the dormitories, documenting ancient beds, crumbling prayer books, and rusted candle holders. In one corner room, she found something unusual. A small wooden box with a silver cross engraved on its lid. Inside were several folded pages written in Latin. The ink faded with age. Clara took a photo of the text and carefully placed the papers into her satchel. She would translate them later that night. By late afternoon, the forest outside had grown darker, and a storm began to brew. The wind howled through broken windows, making the convent groan like a living thing. As she prepared to leave, she heard a faint sound behind her. A soft murmur, like distant chanting. "Hello?" she called out. The echo of her voice returned, but so did the whisper. Slightly louder this time, rhythmic, almost like prayer. Her lantern flickered. The chanting stopped. Then, a door slammed shut somewhere down the hall. Heart pounding, Clara grabbed her recorder and followed the sound. It led her to a locked door she hadn't noticed before. Its wood marked with an unfamiliar symbol, burned deep into the grain. She pressed her ear against it. Silence. But as thunder cracked above the convent, she thought she heard something faint, like the sound of weeping. She stepped back, hesitant. Then, suddenly, her recorder turned on by itself, its small red light blinking. From the speaker came a low, distorted voice whispering her name, Clara. The device slipped from her hands and hit the floor. When she picked it up again, the recording was gone. Panic tightened her throat. She rushed toward the main hall, only to find the front door jammed shut. The storm had intensified. The wind screamed through the rafters, making the bell tower moan. As lightning flashed, she saw, for a brief instant, figures standing at the far end of the corridor. Nuns, their habits tattered, their faces pale as candle wax. But when the light faded, they were gone. She stayed perfectly still, her heart hammering. Then, she noticed something new. The portraits on the walls, every face had changed. Where once there were serene expressions, now each nun appeared hollow-eyed and open-mouthed, as if screaming. Clara stumbled backward and ran toward her equipment. She packed everything in a hurry and waited by the main entrance until the storm began to subside. Finally, the door gave way, and she stepped out into the drenched courtyard, gasping for air. Behind her, the bell of St. Mary's rang once. Just once. A single, heavy toll that echoed through the valley like a warning. Yet no one had touched it in over 100 years. Clara turned and looked up at the tower. Through the cracks of the stone, she could swear she saw movement, like a hand pulling away from the bell rope. And for the first time, she wondered if Father Rook had been right. Some places truly were left forgotten for a reason. The next morning, the fog hung heavy over the valley, turning the ruins of St. Mary's into a phantom silhouette. Clara barely slept the night before, haunted by the echo of the bell that had rung itself. She tried to convince herself that it was the wind or perhaps an old mechanism stirred by the storm. Yet, deep in her mind, she knew better. She brewed coffee over her small camping stove near the courtyard steps, glancing constantly toward the convent doors. The building loomed quietly, patient, as if waiting for her to come back inside. She had planned to spend only one day photographing the site, but curiosity had already chained her to the mystery. After breakfast, she unpacked her laptop and began translating the Latin papers she had found inside the wooden box. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the first line aloud. Peritus per dolorem, lux descendit post sanguinem. Purity through suffering. The light descends after blood. Each page appeared to be part of a confession or diary, written by a nun named Sister Agnes. The entries spoke of unholy whispers that began in the chapel, voices that promised salvation through torment. The last page ended with the words, "We have seen the light beneath the altar. Soon we will be cleansed." A cold gust swept across her tent, scattering some pages into the mud. As she gathered them, she noticed something strange. The ink hadn't faded from the drops of rain. It shimmered faintly, as though alive. By afternoon, Clara re-entered the convent with renewed determination. The halls smelled of mildew and burnt wax. Her flashlight beam danced across cracked walls, revealing crosses drawn in soot, some upright, others inverted. She recorded everything, narrating as she walked. October 12th, 9:47 a.m. The structure is still intact. Signs of ritualistic markings found throughout the northern hall. She paused when the recorder picked up faint static. "Repeat that?" she whispered, pressing it closer to her mouth. Then, under the static, came a whisper, low and melodic, like a choir humming from somewhere far away. She froze. The voice wasn't hers. Following the sound, she turned a corner into the main corridor. Long, arched windows lined the walls, their colored glass depicting saints with broken halos. Her footsteps echoed softly, accompanied by another set that seemed to follow half a beat behind. She spun around, nothing. She forced herself to continue, her pulse quickening. As she passed the infirmary, she heard a faint shuffle inside. The door creaked open with a groan. The air was thick with the scent of old herbs and rusted metal. Dust-covered beds stood in neat rows, each with a rosary hanging from its headboard. In the far corner, something moved. "Hello?" she called, voice shaking slightly. No reply, just a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. Her flashlight trembled in her grip as she approached the noise. The sound stopped. She exhaled shakily, then lowered the light, only to see deep scratch marks across the floorboards, fresh and splintered. Whatever made them had done so recently. As she turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind her. She dropped her recorder in panic and lunged for the handle. It wouldn't budge. She beat on the wood, shouting, "Open!" But the echo came back distorted, as if her own voice were mocking her. Then the chanting began again, soft, rhythmic in Latin. Clara backed away from the door, heart pounding. "Who's there?" The chanting grew louder. The beds began to shake, rosaries rattling violently against the frames. Candles, long dead, sputtered to life one by one. A warm glow filled the room, and for a moment, she saw them. Faint silhouettes of nuns kneeling at each bedside, heads bowed, whispering prayers. Then silence. The candles went out. The door creaked open on its own. Clara stumbled into the hall, gasping. Her recorder blinked red again. It had turned itself back on. The screen displayed a message. Audio saved. 2:13 min. She replayed it as she walked. What she heard made her blood run cold. The same chanting, low and unholy, interspersed with her own voice whispering words she didn't remember speaking. Under the altar. They wait for dawn. Her mind raced. The altar. That was where Sister Agnes's journal mentioned the light beneath. She decided to check the chapel again. As she entered, sunlight filtered weakly through the broken windows, painting crimson shapes on the cracked floor. The air felt heavier now, as if the building itself were holding its breath. The altar stood at the far end, draped in rotted cloth. Clara knelt and inspected the stone base. Her fingers brushed against something carved into it, Latin words etched faintly in the marble. She traced the letters with her flashlight beam. Lux sub carne. Silentium post lumen. Light beneath the flesh. Silence after the light. Behind the altar, a small wooden confessional leaned against the wall. Curious, Clara peered inside. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, except for the seat, which appeared clean, as if someone had been there recently. Her eyes widened. On the wooden divider between priest and confessor, someone had scratched 7 tally marks, and beneath them, her own initials. She stumbled backward, her breath quick and shallow. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here. How could her initials be here? Unless someone or something had been expecting her. Suddenly, the bell above the chapel began to ring again. Not once, but continuously, each toll louder and faster, until it felt like the air itself was shaking. Clara covered her ears and shouted, but the sound only grew. Windows shattered, scattering shards of colored glass across the pews. The crucifix above the altar swayed violently before falling, crashing onto the floor. Then the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she dared to look up. The fallen crucifix lay at her feet, but now, Christ's carved face had changed. His eyes were open, and his mouth was stretched into a wide, silent scream. Clara stumbled back toward the door, trembling. As she did, she noticed something on the floor. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading away from the altar. They weren't hers. They were small, bare, and wet, as though someone had walked through water. The footprints trailed into the hallway, disappearing around a corner. Despite every instinct screaming for her to leave, she followed. The corridor stretched long and dim, the faint whispering starting again. It sounded closer now. Female voices, layered and desperate, murmuring in prayer. As she neared the end of the hall, The voices stopped abruptly, replaced by a low hiss. The air grew colder. Her flashlight flickered, then died. In the darkness, something moved, something soft, dragging across the floor. She fumbled for her backup light, hands shaking, and switched it on. The beam illuminated the wall ahead, covered entirely in words scrawled in blood. "We never left." Her breath caught in her throat. Then, behind her, a whisper brushed her ear. "Neither will you." The flashlight slipped from her hand, its beam spinning wildly across the corridor. For a split second, she saw them. Rows of nuns standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces hidden by veils, their mouths sewn shut. When the light hit the ground, they vanished. Only the sound of Clara's racing heartbeat filled the silence. The storm had passed, but the air inside St. Mary's still felt heavy, thick with something that seemed to pulse through the walls. Clara spent most of the night awake in her tent, listening to the convent breathe. Yes, breathe. Every few minutes, the timbers creaked in a way too rhythmic to be mere wind, as though the building itself was alive, exhaling through its hollow corridors. At dawn, she returned inside. Her flashlight swept through the chapel where the crucifix had fallen. She froze. The statue was standing again, upright, perfectly in place, as if it had never moved. Even the shattered glass from yesterday's storm had vanished. Someone or something was restoring the convent while she slept. She set up her recording equipment in the chapel, determined to catch any movement. As the camera blinked red, she sat on the front pew, staring at the altar. Her thoughts wandered back to the words she'd found etched beneath it. Light beneath the flesh. What did it mean? Her mind returned to the Latin pages, the journal of Sister Agnes. There had been more of them inside the box, folded deep under the false bottom. She'd been too shaken last night to continue reading, but now she opened them carefully, the old paper flaking at the edges. The handwriting grew more frantic as the entries progressed. The early pages spoke of devotion and faith. The later ones whispered of voices in prayer who are not of God. Agnes described how, during midnight vigils, the nuns began hearing hymns that no one remembered teaching them. They believed it to be divine revelation, until the hymns began demanding things. Fasting, silence, pain. We bleed for purity. The light watches beneath the altar. When we are cleansed of flesh, he will appear. Clara frowned. The he mentioned so many times. Was it Christ, or something else the sisters had mistaken for holiness? She flipped to the last entry. The ink had smudged, but a few lines remained legible. Sister Miriam was the first to see him. His face was covered, yet he smiled. We cannot stop the Mass now. The gates are closing. May the Holy Mother forgive us. The final page was stuck to another. Clara carefully peeled it open and gasped. It wasn't writing. It was a drawing, scrawled in dark ink that had seeped through the parchment. A figure loomed tall, faceless, with arms stretched wide like a crucifix. Around it, 21 nuns knelt in worship, their eyes bleeding. The camera behind her clicked. A soft, mechanical sound. Recording had stopped. She turned slowly. No one was there. Her stomach tightened. She walked to the camera and pressed playback. The screen showed static for several seconds. Then the faint outline of a woman standing at the altar, long habit, head bowed. As the static cleared, Clara saw the woman raise her face toward the camera. Her mouth moved, forming words that couldn't be heard. The timestamp on the footage read 3:12 a.m. The time Clara had been asleep in her tent. Panic rose in her chest. She turned off the camera and stuffed it into her bag. Something deep inside told her that the more she recorded, the more she invited it in. Leaving the chapel, she followed the corridor to the library, an enormous room with arched ceilings and rows of rotting shelves. Dust hung in the air like fog. Most of the books were hymnals or theological texts, but one shelf caught her attention. It was filled entirely with empty covers. The pages had been torn out. Inside the hollow spines, she found scraps of paper folded into shapes. Tiny crosses, dozens of them. On each was written the same line in Latin. Flesh is the veil. A sudden thump echoed from above, directly over her head. The sound came again, heavier this time. Clara looked up at the ceiling. Faint cracks ran through the plaster. Something or someone was walking on the floor above. She climbed the narrow staircase leading to the old dormitories, each step groaning under her weight. The upper hall smelled of iron and mold. The air was colder here, biting against her skin. Her flashlight beam trembled across the long row of doors. Each bore a nameplate with a nun's name, though many had been gouged out. She stopped at one that was still legible. Sister Agnes. Her heart thudded as she turned the rusted handle. The door creaked open, revealing a small room lined with decaying wallpaper. A single bed stood by the window, its blanket perfectly smooth. On the nightstand lay a rosary made of black stone, and beside it, a small leather-bound book. She picked it up. It was the rest of the journal. She sat on the bed, brushing away the dust. The first entry read, Day 45 of isolation. The Mother Superior says our suffering brings light. But the light speaks now, not with love, but with hunger. It asks for sacrifice. Clara flipped through the pages, her pulse quickening. Sister Miriam says the voice told her to dig beneath the altar. She says it will show us the true face of God. We heard screams last night. The Mother says they are angels rejoicing. Tomorrow we descend. The last page was nothing but smeared ink, as though written in blood. Only one word stood clear at the bottom. Deliverance. Suddenly, something rustled behind her. She turned. Nothing. The room was empty. She stood, her nerves fraying, and walked to the window. The forest below was motionless, gray mist weaving between the trees. But in the reflection of the glass, she saw it. A figure standing behind her, pale and cloaked, head tilted as though studying her. Clara spun around. No one. The door was still ajar. She swallowed hard and backed away, her hands shaking. The air felt charged, humming faintly. Then, from somewhere down the hall, came the sound of soft footsteps. Deliberate. Approaching. She darted into the corridor, scanning the shadows. The light at the far end flickered. Hello! Her voice came out thin, almost childlike. The footsteps stopped. Then, a whisper. Deliver us? Her flashlight dimmed. From the dormitory doors on both sides, faint knocks began. Slow at first, then faster, synchronized like a heartbeat. Clara ran, her boots slapping against the floor. As she passed the last door, something cold brushed her arm. Fingers long and thin, slipping just beneath her sleeve. She screamed and stumbled down the staircase, nearly falling. The whispers followed her. Dozens of voices now, chanting, pleading, crying. She burst into the courtyard, gulping the damp air. The chanting stopped. Only silence remained. Her trembling hands pulled the journal from her coat pocket. The cover had changed. The crucifix embossed on the leather now bore eyes. Tiny, open, and staring at her. She dropped it, backing away in horror. But before she could move farther, the church bell tolled once more. Clara looked up. The rope of the bell tower swung on its own, though no wind stirred. As she stared, the faint outline of a nun appeared at the top, arms outstretched, face hidden by a veil. Then, in one impossible motion, the figure stepped forward and fell. But when she hit the ground, there was no body. Only a hollow echo that rippled through the courtyard, vibrating in her bones. Clara stumbled backward, her mind spinning. The journal pages flapped open on the ground, their words rearranging themselves, forming a new line in Latin she could barely read through tears. You are one of us now. Her scream was swallowed by the convent's hollow corridors. For weeks after discovering the sealed basement door, Sister Evelyn couldn't shake the sense that something alive, something watchful, lingered behind it. The iron latch had been welded shut, and yet, on stormy nights, she swore she heard soft knocks echoing from beneath her floorboards. Each tap followed a rhythm, 3 short, 2 long, as if calling out a forgotten prayer. Curiosity is a dangerous seed, especially in places where faith is expected to suppress it. But Evelyn's faith was already trembling. The crucifixes in her room tilted slightly overnight. Her rosary beads, hung by her bed, would tangle into tight, choking knots by morning. The other nuns insisted it was the work of rats, of drafts, of imagination. But deep down, Evelyn knew what she felt was deliberate. One rain-lashed evening, Mother Agnes gathered all the sisters in the chapel for an unexpected sermon. The candles flickered as thunder cracked across the sky. "None shall enter the lower chambers of this holy place," she announced in her rasping voice. "The ground beneath us is not sanctified. It is sealed for a reason." Her tone carried both warning and guilt. And for Evelyn that was enough. What was hidden beneath their feet that a woman of God feared so deeply? That night, Evelyn made a decision she couldn't undo. She waited until the convent fell silent. Midnight brought only the echo of dripping rain and the rustle of trees brushing against the stained glass windows. She slipped from her bed, carrying a single candle and the chapel's spare key ring. The hallway stretched before her like a throat, narrow and lined with watching statues. The door to the basement sat behind the confessional booth, cloaked by a hanging tapestry of the Virgin Mary. When Evelyn pulled it aside, she found the rusted latch, the thick layer of dust, and the faint smell of iron and decay. Her trembling hands sorted through the keys until she found one that almost fit. She turned it gently, click. The sound seemed to echo through the convent. The latch loosened. The air grew colder. When she pulled the door open, the candle flickered violently, nearly extinguishing. A heavy breath of foul air escaped the darkness below, like something had been waiting for release. She descended the stone stairs slowly, each step creaking under her bare feet. The flame illuminated faint symbols etched into the walls. Circles, crosses inverted, Latin phrases smeared in faded red. Halfway down, she noticed scratches on the wall. Not random marks, but clawed words, carved by desperate hands. "We were promised heaven, but found only her mouth." Evelyn's heart pounded. Her candle sputtered. When she reached the basement floor, the stench of rot hit her. Rows of wooden cots lined the room, each covered with decayed linens. In one corner, a table stood draped in a black cloth. On it lay a collection of bones, tiny, fragile, unmistakably human. Infant bones. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she heard it, a faint hum. Soft, female voices, singing an old hymn she couldn't quite recognize. The sound wasn't from the staircase. It came from the shadows behind the cots. Evelyn turned slowly, candle shaking, until the light caught a figure standing just beyond reach. A nun's habit, pale face, empty eyes. Evelyn gasped and stepped back, the candle slipping from her grasp, fell rolling across the floor. In the brief flash before darkness swallowed it, she saw dozens of faces staring from the walls. Nuns, their mouths sewn shut, their skin pressed into the stone like trapped souls. Then everything went black. When she awoke, she was lying on the chapel floor. The morning sun filtered through the windows. Her candle was gone, her nightdress stained with mud. The sisters stood in a semicircle around her, whispering prayers. Mother Agnes stood closest, eyes cold and knowing. "You should not have gone there," she said softly. "Now you are bound to it." Bound? Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse. What is down there?" Mother Agnes leaned in, her breath carrying the scent of incense and iron. "Sins too old to confess. We serve not only God here, child. There are debts to be paid." That night, Evelyn dreamt of the basement again, of the same pale figure humming softly beside her bed. But when she woke, the floorboards were wet beneath her feet, and faint muddy footprints led from her bedside to the chapel door. And outside, the morning bells tolled for a funeral. In the following days, strange occurrences plagued the convent. The chapel's candles burned black smoke. The statue of Saint Mary began to weep blood that never dried. Some nuns claimed to see shadows kneeling beside them during prayer, figures whispering in broken Latin. Evelyn could no longer tell if she was awake or trapped in a waking nightmare. Every night, the same sound returned, 3 knocks, 2 pauses, always beneath her bed. She begged Mother Agnes for answers, but the woman merely said, "You opened what was sealed." Now you must learn what they were praying for. The final straw came when Sister Clare, the youngest of them, vanished. Her rosary was found on the basement steps, one bead cracked and slick with blood. The convent carried on as if she had never existed. Her name was never spoken again. Evelyn knew what she had to do. She had to return to the basement, this time not for curiosity, but for truth. That night, she took a lantern and the crucifix from the altar. As she reached the basement door again, she noticed something different. The latch was no longer sealed. The door was already slightly open, as if waiting. She took one trembling breath, whispered a prayer, and descended once more, into the heart of St. Mary's, into the pit of faith and horror intertwined. And in the silence below, something whispered her name. Evelyn. Evelyn's lantern burned with an eerie, trembling flame as she descended into the abyss again. The stairwell seemed longer than before, stretched, distorted, like a mouth swallowing her whole. Each step echoed with an almost deliberate delay, as though the sound wasn't hers anymore. When she reached the final stair, the basement greeted her with that same stench of damp stone and rot. But this time, there was something else. A faint melody, hauntingly beautiful, weaving through the silence. It was the sound of women singing. The voices harmonized in solemn Latin, rising and falling like waves of morning. Her lantern's light flickered, revealing faint silhouettes in the mist, the outlines of veiled figures standing in rows as though waiting for her. "Sisters," Evelyn called out. "Who's there?" No one answered, yet the hymn grew louder. She moved forward, light trembling across the walls. The Latin words now became clearer. "Dominus nos reliquit, sanguine redemptio?" The Lord has forsaken us, redemption through blood. The melody shivered through her bones. Then, from the darkness, a dozen faces slowly came into view. Nuns in tattered habits, their skin gray and waxen, eyes blackened by centuries of decay. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, though no sound escaped their lips. The singing wasn't coming from them. It was coming from the walls themselves. Evelyn stumbled backward, nearly dropping her lantern. The walls pulsated faintly, as if alive. Faces imprinted in the stone, mouths open mid-him. The air grew heavy with the metallic scent of old blood. The crucifix around her neck grew hot against her skin. Then came the whisper. "Why did you open it?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, soft, feminine, layered with echoes of suffering. Evelyn spun around. A shadow stepped forward from behind one of the pillars. It was Sister Clare. Her eyes were hollow, and her lips were sewn shut with coarse black thread. Yet somehow, Evelyn could hear her voice inside her head. "They took us beneath the altar." Clare's voice trembled inside her thoughts. "Not for prayer, for offering." Evelyn's body stiffened. Her breathing turned ragged. "What offering?" she whispered aloud. Clare raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the far end of the chamber. There, behind a curtain of cobwebs, stood an ancient altar, carved from black marble and stained by centuries of sacrifice. On it lay relics wrapped in crimson cloth. Evelyn approached slowly, every instinct in her body screaming to flee. As she unwrapped the cloth, she found old parchment bound with rosary wire. The Latin script was faded, but she could make out enough to understand. A pact sealed by the Sisters of St. Mary, under the covenant of survival. For every century that this convent stands, a blood debt must be renewed. 12 brides of the Lord, taken in silence, returned in faith. Her stomach turned. She understood now. The missing nuns, the ones erased from history, had not left. They had been offered. Offered to what? A deep tremor rumbled beneath her feet, answering her unspoken question. The lantern shook violently in her hand. From beneath the altar, the ground split open slightly, releasing a gust of heat and the faint scent of sulfur. The hymns swelled louder, now distorted, almost joyous. Evelyn fell to her knees, clutching her crucifix. "In the name of God, stop!" she cried. But the darkness was no longer listening to God. Suddenly, the candle flames that lined the old cots ignited all at once, bathing the room in flickering red. In the shifting light, she saw them, dozens of veiled figures rising from the shadows. Their movements were slow, synchronized, as if guided by unseen strings. They began to form a circle around the altar. Each one placed their hands over their hearts and bowed their heads in unison. Evelyn could feel the air thickening, humming with energy. Then, at the heart of the circle, a tall figure emerged, a woman in a habit unlike the others. Her veil was crimson, her eyes burning like dying embers. "Mother Superior Agnes," Evelyn whispered, recognizing her. But something about her was wrong. Her face was younger, almost radiant, and her skin glistened like polished wax. "Child," the woman said, her voice both soothing and terrifying. "You've wandered where faith ends and truth begins." Evelyn backed away. "What is this place? What have you done?" Agnes smiled faintly. "Long ago, this convent was dying. Disease, famine, heresy. We prayed, but heaven gave no answer. So we sought help from elsewhere. We made a promise, to preserve the faith no matter the cost." Her hand brushed the air, and the veiled nuns bowed deeper. "In return for our devotion, we were given eternal service. We do not age. We do not die. But every century, we must renew the covenant." Evelyn's heart pounded. "With blood. With sacrifice," Agnes corrected softly. "The choir must never fall silent." Evelyn shook her head in disbelief. "You call this faith? You've bound yourself to something unholy." Agnes stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly red in the lantern's light. "Holiness is a fragile thing, Sister Evelyn. It's only light when it's convenient. But in darkness, darkness listens." As she spoke, the hymns turned to screams. The veiled nuns began to convulse, their bodies twisting, mouths opening wider than humanly possible. From their throats poured black smoke that coiled toward the altar, feeding the fissure beneath it. The ground shook violently, and the sound of whispering voices rose from below, hundreds of them, desperate and pleading. Evelyn clutched the lantern tighter. "No, no more." She ran toward the altar, grabbing one of the rosaries tied around the relics. In a burst of courage or madness, she slammed the lantern against the marble, shattering it. The oil spilled, and the flames spread rapidly across the chamber. The smoke rose, the hymns broke, and the shadows screamed. Agnes's face twisted in rage. "You fool! Do you think fire can undo what was sealed with eternity?" Evelyn staggered backward as the flames licked the walls, illuminating the carved faces of the trapped nuns, each one now silently mouthing her name. "Join us," whispered a dozen voices in her head. "You've already been chosen." The heat grew unbearable. The altar cracked open, revealing something massive moving below, something breathing. A single black hand, charred and skeletal, reached through the gap. Evelyn turned and fled up the stairs, choking on smoke. Behind her, she could still hear the chorus singing, even through the flames. Their voices followed her up, relentless, mournful, divine. When she burst through the basement door and slammed it shut, the convent fell silent again. Only the faint toll of the chapel bell broke the stillness. She collapsed to the floor, trembling, coughing, covered in soot. But as she looked up, she froze. The crucifix above the chapel altar had turned upside down, and in the distance, faintly through walls and stone, she could still hear them singing. The morning after the fire, St. Mary's stood shrouded in mist. Smoke still rose from the old chapel's windows, curling toward the heavens as if carrying prayers heaven refused to answer. Evelyn awoke on the floor, her lungs raw, her vision blurred. Around her, silence reigned. No voices, no bells, no life. She stumbled to her feet. The convent hallways were scorched, their crucifixes melted into grotesque shapes. The portraits of former sisters hung half-burned, their eyes hollowed out by the flames. And yet, despite the destruction, she could hear something faint, a soft hum, like the echo of distant chanting. Following the sound, she reached the chapel. The altar was split in two, blackened by fire. But the air was colder here, unnaturally still. Her gaze drifted upward, and her heart froze. Behind the altar stood the veiled figures, 12 of them, motionless, untouched by the fire, their faces hidden, their hands clasped as if in eternal prayer. Among them stood Mother Agnes, her crimson veil now turned to ash-gray. "Child," Agnes whispered, voice barely audible, "you cannot kill what was never alive." Evelyn stepped back, shaking her head. "You should have burned with the rest. You should have ended." Agnes smiled faintly. "Faith is not ended by fire. It is reborn through it." As she spoke, the others lifted their heads in unison. Their skin cracked, revealing pale light beneath, as if something was trying to crawl out from within. The hymn returned, soft, melodic, almost tender. But beneath it was another sound, something beating, like a heart made of stone. The cracked altar began to move. The fissure Evelyn had seen before widened again, glowing from within. She could see faint silhouettes twisting below the surface, faces of nuns, of the innocent, of the damned, all reaching upward in agony. Mother Agnes turned her gaze toward Evelyn. "You opened the door, sister. You gave them passage. And now they will rise to sing forevermore." The hymn swelled, vibrating the air, shaking the glass windows until they shattered. Evelyn fell to her knees, covering her ears as the sound pierced through her skull. She crawled toward the door, desperate to escape. But as she reached for the handle, she saw her reflection in a shard of broken glass, her eyes glowing faintly gold, her lips moving without her will, singing the same cursed hymn. Her blood ran cold. She pressed her hands over her mouth, but the voice kept singing from within her. In that moment, she understood. The choir of the damned didn't just live beneath St. Mary's anymore. It lived through her. And as she fled the burning convent into the mist, the bells began to toll again, 12 times, for 12 nuns. Each toll carried a whisper through the fog. Faith never dies. It only changes its master. Evelyn ran until the convent disappeared into the fog behind her. The forest swallowed her whole, cold, damp, and silent except for her ragged breathing. Her robes clung to her skin, soaked with soot and sweat. Every shadow looked like a watching figure. Every whisper of wind sounded like a voice calling her name. She stumbled upon a dirt road leading to the nearby village. When she reached the first farmhouse, she collapsed at the doorstep. The farmer's wife, startled by her appearance, rushed to help. "Sister, what happened? You're hurt." Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice came out broken. "The convent, it's gone. They're all gone." The woman exchanged a worried look with her husband. "St. Mary's?" he asked slowly. "Sister, St. Mary's has been abandoned for 50 years. Evelyn's blood ran cold. "No," she gasped. "I was there. I spoke to them. I saw." But as she spoke, she realized her hands were shaking violently. Her reflection in the farmhouse window caught her eye, and what she saw made her stumble backward. Her pupils were faintly glowing gold, and her lips were still moving in silent rhythm. The hymn, it was still playing somewhere inside her mind, like a record that refused to stop. The farmer's wife backed away, crossing herself. "Lord have mercy." Evelyn pressed her palms against her ears, trembling. "Please, tell me the date." "It's October 13th, the man replied cautiously. "The year, 1975. Evelyn froze. The last thing she remembered before entering the convent's basement was writing in her journal, dated 1924. 51 years had passed. The room tilted, her vision blurred. The humming grew louder, until it wasn't in her head anymore. It filled the air. The windows began to vibrate. Outside, the crows in the fields rose into the sky, screeching in panic. The farmer shouted, "What's happening?" Evelyn's voice broke through the chaos. "They're not gone. They've followed me." From beyond the hills, the mist thickened again. Through it came faint outlines, 12 veiled figures, walking in slow, perfect unison toward the village. Their hymns grew stronger with every step. The woman screamed and fled inside, locking the door. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes glistened with tears as she whispered, I'm so sorry. Then, one by one, the church bells of the village began to toll, though no one had touched them. The sound spread across the valley, low, solemn, endless. The hymn had escaped St. Mary's, and with every echo that rolled through the fog, Evelyn could feel the last piece of her soul slipping away. She turned toward the advancing shadows and whispered a prayer that no longer belonged to God. Forgive us, for we have become what we feared. The mist did not fade with the dawn. It only deepened, swallowing the horizon in a gray shroud. Evelyn stood at the edge of the village, her habit torn, her hands trembling. Behind her, frightened families barricaded their doors as the bells kept tolling slow, deliberate, each one a death knell echoing through the valley. She knew what had to be done. The curse had followed her because she'd opened the seal. It would only end where it began, inside St. Mary's. With each step back toward the ruined convent, the air grew colder. The trees bent inward as though bowing to something unseen. The path that once led through the forest now seemed older, overgrown, unnatural, as if time itself resisted her return. When she reached the gate, the convent loomed like a wound in the earth. Its windows were shattered, its walls scorched black, yet from within came the unmistakable sound of chanting, the same hymn that haunted her dreams, the same voices. She entered through the broken door, clutching a silver crucifix so tightly that blood trickled from her palm. "In the name of God," she whispered, "let this end." The chapel was just as she had left it. Split altar, cracked floor, the scent of ash and blood still lingering. But this time, the veiled figures stood waiting for her, 12 in a perfect circle. In the center stood Mother Agnes, her face glowing faintly beneath her veil. "You have come home, Sister Evelyn," she said, voice echoing unnaturally. "The choir awaits its final voice." Evelyn raised the crucifix. "I won't sing your cursed hymn." Agnes tilted her head, almost sadly. "You already are." The air vibrated with sound. Evelyn could hear her own voice joining the chant, though her lips didn't move. The crucifix burned hot in her grasp. The walls pulsed like veins filled with light. The trapped souls, the ones in the stone, were moving again, faces shifting, whispering her name. "You freed us," they said together. "Now free yourself." Evelyn fell to her knees. Her heart thundered, her vision flashing between light and darkness. A single thought broke through the chaos: destroy the altar. She crawled toward it, dragging herself through the cracked floor, chanting louder than the voices around her. "In nomine Patris, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." With the last of her strength, she slammed the crucifix into the altar's fissure. A scream tore through the convent, not from her throat, but from beneath it. The ground split open, releasing a blinding light. The veiled nuns turned to ash, their hymns dissolving into silence. Mother Agnes's veil caught fire, and as her body crumbled, she whispered, "You've silenced the choir, but not the faith." Then everything went still. When the light faded, Evelyn lay alone in the ruins. The air was calm. The bells had stopped. She closed her eyes, whispering one last prayer. No one knows if she lived or died that night. But every October 13th, the wind over St. Mary's carries a faint sound. A woman's voice, softly singing a hymn that was never meant to be heard.